Today, we have the honor of having Nancy Pearcey as our guest.
Cultural change is happening so quickly these days. Talking to your own children is a cross-cultural ministry.
Share the gospel clear and strong. Stand for, claim your heritage of truth.
Welcome to Heritage of Truth. Today, we have the honor of having Nancy Pearcey as our guest. Welcome, Nancy.
Well, thank you. Thanks for having me.
Well, you have a new book out called Finding Truth, 5 Principles for Unmasking Atheism, Secularism, and Other God Substitutes. Now, how many books have you written before this one?
Well, you would ask me a hard question right to start off.
Well, just give me a
5.
general idea.
About
5.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. One of them was Total Truth.
Mm-hmm.
And How Now Shall We Live?
How Now Shall We Live
with Chuck Colson.
Mm-hmm.
She's an excellent author, an incredible apologist. So I'm just really, really excited to have you as a guest. So you write as a former agnostic. What is it about your experience as an agnostic that equips you to write a book like this one?
This book, more than any other book, grows out of my own experience.
Mm-hmm.
I grew up in a Christian home, but when I was in high school, I started asking questions. Mm-hmm. And the most fundamental question, how do we know it's true? Mm-hmm. That's I started at the most basic level. And unfortunately, none of the adults in my life could answer that question. Mm-hmm. I spoke to a Christian college professor thinking he would have an educated answer. And I said, why are you a Christian? And he said, it works for me. And I had
That's not a good reason.
It's not enough. and I talked to a seminary dean. Mm-hmm. And all he said was, don't worry, we all have doubts sometimes, as though it was just a psychological phase I was going through. And so eventually I decided that Christianity must not have any answers, mm-hmm. Or they would give them to me. Mm-hmm. So I very intentionally walked away from my Christian upbringing and started looking for what was really true. Mm-hmm. And it was years later, I spent years as an agnostic, and I ended up at L'Abri in Switzerland when Francis Schaeffer was mm-hmm. teaching there, his ministry. And that was the first time I encountered Christians who could answer and engage with the secular ideas that I had picked up by then. Mm-hmm. And so that's why my audience in particular is for young people and their families who are having questions, mm-hmm. like I did.
Right.
And equipping them, this is at a level, Finding Truth is at a level that they can read, but equipping their parents, teachers, and pastors as well to help walk through those questions and how can we answer them, and prepare young people for the challenges they face mm-hmm. in an increasingly secularized society.
Mm-hmm. Now, when you say young people, are you talking teens?
It tests out as upper high school.
Okay.
So I know I'm a mom, I'm a mother, and I know so often, especially with books on serious subjects, mm-hmm. that it's written for the parent, and the parent says, wouldn't you please write something my kid can read himself? So I did strive to write it at a level, like mm-hmm. I say, it says test out about mid-high school, mm-hmm. If you run it through the difficulty tests.
Right.
So yeah, the goal is that young people can read it. It's being used in church youth groups. Mm-hmm. It's being used in high schools. It's being used in women's groups.
Good.
So that they can answer their children's questions.
Mm-hmm. How can atheism or secularism be a God substitute, as your subtitle puts it?
Right. What's unique in the approach to finding truth is many people think of apologetics as something kind of abstract for intellectuals. And Finding Truth roots the apologetics arguments in Romans 1. Mm-hmm. Because Paul is talking to a congregation that hasn't heard him speak before. Mm-hmm. And so maybe some of them weren't even Christian. So he lays out the case for God in a more systematic way mm-hmm. than anywhere else in Scripture. And one of the things he says is, if you don't acknowledge the biblical God, the transcendent creator, mm-hmm. you will have to make a God substitute, an idol, out of something in the created order. Mm-hmm. What else is there? So we sometimes think of idols as golden calves and statues, but of course it's also abstract things like love or success. And in the academic world, when your kids go off to college, what they're going to face is ideas, intellectual idols, idols of the mind, so to speak. And one of them is, for example, the most dominant worldview in the academic world is materialism. Well, what does it say? It starts with matter. Is matter part of the created order? Of course it is. So materialism as a philosophy qualifies as an idol in Paul's sense of the term. It's the eternal, self-existing, ultimate cause of everything else that exists, according to materialism. So it functions in the same way that God does. Or can reason be an idol?
Oh, yes, absolutely.
Sure. So rationalism is the philosophy that says human reason is the source and standard of all truth. Albert Einstein even called himself a believing rationalist.
Yeah.
So he understood it was a complete worldview. I use it in my classroom because my kids are really, my students, to be more formal, are wrestling for the first time with a lot of different ideas, and it's easy for them to get distracted by the details and not really know how do I grab the essence of this system of thought. And I say, forget the details, go to the idol. What is it that it proposes as the ultimate reality, as its God's substitute? And that will shape everything else. So that gives people a handle on how to get to the heart of competing worldviews.
I thought that was really good in here when you described that. Given the many worldviews, philosophies, and theories in our pluralistic world, is it really feasible to evaluate each one of them?
Well, I get that question a lot, especially, busy parents. Are they really going to master all these isms? Again, it goes out of my experience because, I've worked in apologetics and, interested in philosophy as a Christian. And I thought, this is going to take a lifetime. When do I ever reach real confidence that Christianity is true to the level that I'm never going to find something else that ends up being more persuasive? We're committed to truth. What if I find something else that ends up persuading me that it's true instead? So in finding truth, I give a single set of strategies, 5 principles, as the subtitle says, 5 principles that you can use on any worldview. You don't have to memorize a different argument for every different ism you encounter. You have a single set of principles, and they're based in Scripture, so you know they're valid.
Right.
You know that they're universally true. They will apply to everything. And even myself, in writing this book, I've come to much greater confidence that I will be able to handle anything that's thrown at me. So that's the goal for our young people, especially as they go off to college. Here's an example. I recently met a mother whose son had gone off to the secular university, state university, and lost his faith within a semester because he was studying psychology. And he was encountering, Freudianism, Skinner, Adler. He was encountering these isms he'd never heard before. And as you probably know, in psychology, most of them are not only secular, but hostile to Christianity. Freud said, Christianity is for people who are so immature they can't grow up. They have to project a father figure into the sky to make them feel happy because they're so immature. So this young man had no idea how to counter those isms. Well, Finding Truth would equip young people who are leaving for college with a single, streamlined, biblically based method or strategy that they can use with anything they encounter.
Yeah, that's good. That's really good. The catchphrase on the cover is "Don't think, just believe." Time for a reality check. What kind of reality check are you calling for?
There's basically 2 ways you test an idea, any idea. Whether it's another worldview or religion, or whether it's just, your friend's excuse for why he showed up late. And does it make sense? Does it fit the facts? And secondly, does it hold together logically? So the test for truth is saying, look, even as Christians are sometimes afraid to test the truth of Christianity. They think, faith means, putting blinders on and not paying attention to the challenges.
Isn't that sad that we think the Word of God can't handle that? If it's the Word of God, it can stand up to anything.
That's right. That's right. But it's a translation process.
Right.
In a sense. That's how I think of it, is that we're called to be missionaries. And we have to, in a sense, even if we're talking to people who speak our language, they speak English,
Right.
you're still making a translation process to their thought forms. They think differently. Secular, modern, and postmodern people think differently. And so there's still a translation process as you sort of restate eternal Christian truth in the language that is being used today so that people understand it.
What's a hip-hop artist like Lecrae doing in a book about worldviews?
Oh, I love this. Finding truth really shatters the stereotypes of who cares about ideas. We tend to think, especially when we hear the word apologetics, we tend to think of sort of geeky intellectuals, and we don't think, no, this is for everybody, this is for you and me. For example, Lecrae is a hip hop artist who grew up in Houston, actually, where I live now. Father abandoned the family at a young age. He got involved in gang activity, sex and drugs. Somebody finally reached out to Lecrae, and he became a Christian. But as he said in several interviews, he said, the real transformation wasn't just my conversion. He said, it's when I discovered that Christianity is total truth. And he was referring to my earlier book, Total Truth. And he had read Total Truth and discovered that Christianity, here's how he put it. Let me give you his own words. He said, Christianity is not just religious truth, it is total truth. Or it's not just saving truth, as he said in another place, it is total truth, it's truth about all of reality. And so this is fascinating. Somebody that you would not think would care about apologetics, according to the normal stereotypes. It was life transforming for him. And so that's the message I'm trying to get across, and I have examples of high school athletes, for example. I have examples that show that finding truth breaks the stereotype and presents apologetics in a way that you can see that it's relevant for everybody. You can see that it's relevant for, we're all made in God's image. We all have a mind. We all want to make sense of what we think. That's why finding truth is written in a way that it's accessible to a wide audience.
That's good. I think it's really important for people to realize, we're supposed to be able to support what we believe when we're asked to give an answer for why we believe. We're supposed to be able to do it. It's not that hard when you study something like this, and it's not. I've read part of this book so far, and I think it's wonderful. It's a great argument. It's simple. You follow what Paul said in Romans 1. It really is.
And in the book I cite studies showing that this really is what young people are looking for. In other words, there were studies done on why people leave their Christian upbringing, why they deconvert.
Right.
And the researchers expected to find emotional reasons. They were hurt, relationship issues. They were surprised to find that the most frequently given answer was, I couldn't get answers to my doubts and questions. And the largest of these studies, the most respected, gave open-ended questions so that there was no power of suggestion happening here.
That's good.
These were young people speaking in their own words and saying things like, I'm not getting answers to my questions, it doesn't make sense to me, it's not answering the questions I'm getting in my public school classroom. So the empirical evidence now is showing how important it is to listen to young people's questions and to craft answers that are targeted toward the secular ideas that they're picking up.
and letting them use their minds. I mean, it doesn't make it like Ravi Zacharias, let my people think.
Yes.
You know, we need to use our minds. We're supposed to love God with our heart, soul, mind, and strength.
That's right, and it helps.
Yeah.
And it helps kids feel better about themselves. I mean, if it also has the emotional impact because it gives them confidence and it makes them feel smart and capable, and they're not afraid of the questions anymore that they're getting from the media as well as from their friends. I mean, it has the emotional impact as well when you equip them with their minds.
Yeah, and when they go into colleges and they are faced with psychology professors and professors who are teaching evolution and so forth, they're going to have a solid foundation under them so that they're not going to just falter and fall because they don't know why they believe.
That's right. I was walking down the hallway of a Christian college where I was teaching, and I saw a young person, one of the students, reading a book on postmodernism. And it was a good book. I knew the book, so I stopped and said, "So what are you learning?" And he said, "I'm learning about myself." He said, "I had no idea I had absorbed so many elements of postmodern thinking."
Wow.
And this book is, this is like a mirror. It's reflecting back to me how much how much I've absorbed from the secular culture. So that's why it's important, not just for answering the challenges of the secular world, but also as part of our sanctification. Like you said, it's learning to love God with all your mind, finding out where you have absorbed secular ideas. Another example is I received an email from a woman who said, I was raised in a home where the rule was you only read Christian books. She said, but then I read your books and found out I had absorbed all these secular ideas without knowing it because I didn't study them. I didn't have a word for that set of ideas, and so I had no critical grid. And so that's why it's so important to equip young people. The critical grid is what enables them to recognize secular ideas and to say, oh, I've heard of this one before. I know where that's coming from, and I know why it falls short, and why Christianity offers better answers.
I didn't know that either. I was one of those students that went to college, took psychology, and even classes that had nothing to do with science. They mentioned evolution all the time. And I went home to my mom and said, oh, this is how it all happened. I soaked that all in. And so that's why I care so much about truth, and because I was duped, and I don't want other young people to go through the same things I did. That's why I appreciate books like yours so much. You have a chapter titled Freeloading Atheists. Who are they, and what are they freeloading?
It's the last chapter in the book is making a case for Christianity. In other words, up until then, we've mostly argued against secular worldviews and given people the tools. But of course, you have to also argue positively for Christianity. And why not use secularists' own words? So in this chapter, I show from secularists themselves that many of them acknowledge that their own worldview falls short. It's fascinating, because leading thinkers today are stating openly that they have to borrow from Christianity. An example is Richard Rorty. He's a well-known postmodern philosopher, and he writes mostly on politics, and he's acquired the reputation as the philosopher of democracy. But then he acknowledges in some of his writings that he doesn't actually have a philosophical base for democracy or for equal rights. He says, I'm an evolutionist, I'm a Darwinist, and in the struggle for survival, according to evolution, the strong win out, the weak are left behind, so there's no basis there for universal human rights, for seeing all of them as having equal dignity. And so then he says, what do? I reach over and borrow that element from Christianity. And he's the one who uses the phrase, freeloading atheist. He said, I'm a freeloading atheist. I'm happy to freeload the concept of human dignity from Christians. So, and you say, well, this is where we could start with our apologetics. You want to make sure you're answering the questions people are actually asking. And one way you can do that is look at what the secularists themselves admit. And on a similar theme, there's a British philosopher today who makes the same arguments. He says, Darwin has shown us that we are animals. This is a direct quote. And therefore, any atheist view of human dignity is borrowed from Christianity. It's a derivative of Christianity. So they're handing it to us on a platter.
Yeah.
They're saying, look, Christianity is the basis for human rights, human dignity, equality, all these wonderful things that secular people want.
Mm-hmm.
It gives us an opportunity to, number one, answer the questions that are actually being asked and to present Christianity in a very positive light. Because sometimes I think people have this notion that Christianity is negative. I mean, it teaches about sin and guilt, and so it's dismissed as having a negative view of life. No, we have a much more positive view of life than any secular worldview, and it's proven by the fact that all these secular people are taking what they want from Christianity. So it suggests a very positive approach that Christians can take.
Yeah, that's a great idea. Well, the back cover includes endorsements from a surprisingly wide range of people, from top philosophers to artists, writers, popular entertainers. Why does Finding Truth appeal to such a diverse audience?
That's part of breaking the stereotypes, isn't it? We talked about that earlier with Lecrae. You know, it's astonishing that one book would get reviews from and endorsements from top Christian philosophers and apologists, like J.P. Moreland or Paul Copan, as well as more popular writers like Lee Strobel. And then the children's author, John Erickson, I don't know if you know him, but he's well known in among Christian teachers and homeschoolers. But he's a children's author. And then somebody like Phil Robertson of Duck Dynasty, who we didn't approach. It was a relative of his who read my books and gave him the manuscript for Finding Truth. And he said he loved it. So here we are with a book that can appeal to such a wide range. Why? Because we all sense that the challenge for Christians is much more difficult today than it used to be. You know, there was a time when there was a kind of cultural Christianity, and the public ethic was largely shaped by Christianity, and your secular neighbors pretty much agreed with you, at least on the moral issues. And that's no longer the case. Now the public ethic is clearly secular, and Christians are standing out more from their neighbors and are finding themselves being challenged much more to know what you believe and why, how to support your convictions, how to express them clearly in a more secular setting, like the public schools or like all your kids' friends. You know? We are being challenged to go beyond cultural Christianity. Make sure that you don't have a secondhand faith. Make sure that you have thought it through yourself and know what you believe and why.
So how would you, as a closing word, how would you encourage parents and grandparents with preparing their children and grandchildren for when they grow up and go out into the culture?
I read a really heartbreaking blog post, a blog post written by a young woman who said, "My parents had no idea what I was going to face in the university, and therefore they did not prepare me." And she said, I was in my classrooms, and the thing I was least prepared for was the incredible diversity of the ideas I was going to encounter in the classroom and among my friends. And she said, it seemed like everyone else could defend their beliefs better than I could. And when I read that, I think, brings us back to what is the ultimate motivation for apologetics. It should be love. That we should love people enough to take their questions seriously. We should love people enough that we do the hard work of finding answers if we don't already know them, that we go out and educate ourselves and find the answers. Cultural change is happening so quickly these days that talking to your own children is a cross-cultural ministry. It's a cross-cultural ministry. We should see ourselves as missionaries speaking to a different culture. even with our own kids. We can't assume that they think the way we do. Even if you've managed to protect them, you've been a conscientious parent, even homeschooling families, probably protected their children more than most. I homeschooled my kids, and you know what? Again and again, I ran into friends whose first kid went off to college, lost their faith. And they started thinking, whoa, what should we do differently? What should we be doing? And I'll tie it back to my experience at L'Abri. When I was at L'Abri as a young secular person, what struck me the most was it was clear that they were motivated by love. The staff there, Francis Schaeffer himself, they loved people enough to answer their questions, to research the ideas that were currently, back then it was existentialism. And how many Christian parents were reading existentialism? Okay, but Schaeffer was. Because he knew that's where the young people were, that's where their thinking was, and you needed to apply Christian truth there. It's like diagnosing the illness. If you apply the Band-Aids everywhere else but where they're actually bleeding, we have to know where they're bleeding, love them enough to pay attention to their questions. And that will take apologetics again out of the sort of abstract realm of the mind and into, relationship.
Where can people find you online?
There is a new website, nancypearcey.com.
Okay.
And there's also a website that really my husband does called The Pearcey Report that does news and commentary from a Christian worldview perspective. So nancypearcey.com and The Pearcey Report. And Pearcey is, I've been told I should always spell it, Pearcey.
Right. Okay, well, thank you so much for being our guest.
Thank you for having me.
Share the gospel.